Okay, I am back, and I have found the comment that I wanted to respond to. This is from Robert Cornell, and actually this is several weeks old, but I'm finally turning my attention to it. It has to do with an issue I raised in an office hours a while ago about the difficulty, in my view, of separating love and attachment. You know, a commonly said thing in Buddhist circles, especially if, for example, someone is trying to overcome a loss of a loved one, is to say, well, you know, love is fine, but maybe you should try to overcome the attachment, and that would help you overcome the grief, I guess. Robert Cornell has this story about something that happened to him. It's kind of moving and you might say sad. He says, a week ago, a neighbor of ours went missing one evening. He was an 83-year-old man who had dementia and was impaired in vision and hearing. He loved walking in the woods and visiting the grave of his partner in a nearby cemetery. Anyway, after a couple of days, the man's body was found. He had indeed wandered into the woods and eventually died. Robert writes, when I examine my response to this situation, I find that there are no words to adequately describe the subtleties of feeling involved. Did I hope, desire, wish for a good outcome? I don't think so. What I felt was a deep ache, a sadness, a compassion for what he might be going through. In the end, I could only hope that he had gone to die in a place he loved, and yet hope is inadequate to describe a feeling that is devoid of desire or expectation. Robert goes on, there's a heartache, a sadness, a compassion for another being that, as difficult as it might be to bear, is not suffering. It is a feeling of profound intimacy tied with the equanimity not to desire that things be any different from the way they are, not to be attached to any outcome. It is not different from the joy that comes from another's happiness, and it can only appear when the self, call it the egoic self if you must, is out of the picture. Okay, so this is, you know, sounds like a very wholesome response. I would say I think there are different kinds of love, and in some cases it's more challenging to separate the attachment than others. I think it's certainly possible to have a love for a friend or a neighbor, as in this case, and yet to not to manage to, in some sense, not be attached and so come to terms with the loss of that person. But I do think there are other kinds of love. Love for relatives, in particular offspring, is pretty intense. Romantic love can feel intense. And I think those two things are very different things. I mean, in Darwinian terms, you would expect them to be very different things. They may involve some of the same chemicals, some of the same feelings, but they are functionally different things. Love of offspring is much closer to being, by nature, an unconditional thing, at least in terms of the logic of natural selection. And in my view, that is really the hard case, right? That is the really, really, really hard case in my experience. And my wife and I agreed on this a long time ago. You know, we agreed there's a sense in which we love each other, but when it comes to our kids, you know, it's more intense. And so I would like to hear from people who feel that they've performed that feat. And I apologize because I think there was a comment to this effect, an interesting comment weeks ago that I failed to pick up on. Somewhere it's on the discussion forum or on Facebook or somewhere, but I don't know where. And it was about, it spoke to this point, I think, of loving kids without attachment. And there are different senses of the word attachment as well. So, you know, with romantic love, it can be attachment in the sense of possessiveness. In other words, you want their love and you don't want them giving it to somebody else. You know, jealousy. You could see that as a form of attachment. With offspring, that can happen, but I think more often you know, it consists. It's not just possessiveness. it is just an attachment to their, to their well-being, and a real difficulty coming to terms with the possibility that they may be suffering. That's the really hard case, and I'm interested in that as a challenge, and also I'm interested in the philosophical questions of whether you would want to, there are people who would say, look, I don't think it's healthy to lose entirely your attachment to children. So that's an interesting question. But anyway, that's kind of that I think is the toughest case. Although this is a very illuminating and an example worth heeding, I think, that Robert has laid out. A couple of quick things before we go.